There is an article in today's newspaper by our illustrious MP Shashi Tharoor, a very different conception of Ram Rajya. We shall cover this topic from the perspective of GS Paper 4, Ethics, Integrity and Aptitude. It is the concern of every philosopher to study as to how the society must function, and so did Mahatma Gandhi. Ram Rajya is a term that was popularized by him. Ram Rajya of Mahatma Gandhi is an ideal society that he envisioned based on rule of Lord Rama. The term Ram in Ram Rajya represents an ideal king who ruled with wisdom, compassion, and justice. So the concept of Ram Rajya reflects the idea of an ideal society where everyone is equal and justice prevails. The Raj, the society, is ruled by an ideal king. You can draw a parallel from Plato's concept of philosopher king. In the conception of Ram Rajya of Mahatma Gandhi, the ruler, the ideal king, has to rule based on certain principles. And the first principle of rule in every theory that deals with societal construct is justice. Justice, you must have observed, is also the first value mentioned in the preamble. It is not by chance, but it is by design. Justice is the value in which the ordering of society is centered. But in Gandhiji's concept of Ram Rajya, there is simplicity of administration, minimalist governance. And justice comes from individuals. Individuals must work towards the self-sufficiency, both economically and spiritually. So it's the conscience of the individuals. It's the moral values inculcated in the individuals that's going to bring justice. Gandhiji also emphasized on the importance of equality in his concept of Ram Rajya. He believed that all individuals, regardless of their caste, creed, gender, they should have equality of opportunities and equal rights. As you already understand, there has to be minimalist governance. So the process of governance has to be steered by individuals. So they must be self-sufficient in morality, self-sufficient in spirituality. So the rule in Ram Rajya must be such that it advocates for non-violence. And many means of non-violence has been explained in the concept of Ram Rajya of Gandhiji, such as Satyagraha. Satyagraha literally means the grounding of the truth, or to say that you have to hold on to truth, ahimsa and self-control. This is not just the external behavior of non-violence. It is linked with the internal self, the samadhi of one person, or to say the soul in the context of Plato's vision of ideal state of the person. So that behavior comes intrinsically, so that you are ready to give on the right of your property, so that you are ready to work as a trustee of others. That is non-violence within your soul. In Ram Rajya, people should be able to self-govern themselves and should have the power to make decisions that affects their lives. For instance, the concept of referendum in the current times. And if the rule are based on these principles, there would be prosperity in Ram Rajya. Gandhiji used to narrate stories, write articles in bits and pieces to explain the concept of Ram Rajya. A place where there will be happiness and prosperity, you will be happy soul, a happy mind and body, and happy agent of morality. That's how the happy society will come about. But apart from certain principles, there would be certain characteristics of Ram Rajya that will be more explicit. There must be visibility of moral and spiritual values. Gandhiji believed that the society must be grounded in certain moral values like truth, love, compassion, forgiveness. Gandhiji focused on the conscience of an individual to guide the behavior. You understand by now that any major philosopher has focused on the internal parameters. Consciousness, ability to introspect, the soul, and internal values. The same is in the concept of samadhi of Buddhism. The same is said by Socrates. An unexamined life is not worth living. The same is said by Plato. Justice of soul brings justice in society. So these values have to be there and these values must be expressed. In the Gandhian concept of Ram Rajya, there would be decentralization of power. Gandhiji believed that power should be decentralized and that decision making should be made at the local level. So he advocated for establishment of Gram Sabhas. This principle is also there in Article 40 as part of the Gandhian aspects in DPSP. Gandhiji extremely stressed on community living. He argued that wealth was not an end in itself, but it was a mean to serve the common good. Gandhiji believed that trusteeship was essential for creating an equitable and just society, where the rich and the powerful people they must act as trustees, using their resources for betterment of weak and vulnerable. And hence he believed that the wealthy and powerful should voluntarily surrender their wealth for the betterment of society. Now, how will they do it voluntarily? From the idea of non-violence. Non-violence is not just not using force or killing people. Non-violence is internal harmony as well. So if you really practice non-violence within you, then only the principle of trusteeship can be exhibited by you. Gandhiji's idea of trusteeship was based on the principle of non-violence and voluntary cooperation. Gandhiji believed that economic inequality was one of the root cause of social unrest, and to overcome it, there has to be economic self-sufficiency. And that is why he advocated for establishment of small-scale industries and use of local resources to promote self-sufficiency. He was against mass production by machines in the factories. He was for production by the masses. Any philosopher on the face of earth that you will read will focus on education, because any philosopher that you will read will focus on internal parameters, the internal determinant of behavior. And these internal determinant of behavior can only come about through moral education. This is the idea of Ram Rajya of Gandhiji. It took time for him to explain as to what Ram Rajya would be, but these are the principles and characteristics through which one can comprehend how he envisaged his Ram Rajya. It's like telling to people, आज चल के तुझे मैं लेके चलूं एक ऐसे जहां के तले, जहां गम भी ना हो, आंसू भी ना हो, बस प्यार ही प्यार पले. Sometimes concepts are difficult to put across even by the philosophers, but all in all, it's a place where prosperity will prevail. There are many other ideas of ideal society by many other philosophers. Here I'll list some of them about which you may already know, or anyways you will prepare during the course of your preparation. Plato elaborately discussed the concept of his just society in his book The Republic, although it's the English translation and the name is also Englishly translated, but the book that we read is called The Republic. Plato proposed an ideal just society in his book The Republic, where the kings are philosophers and philosophers are kings, because the kings and the rulers they have to work according to certain principles. So they must be virtuous. And according to Socrates, and according to his most illustrious follower and student, Plato, virtues come from knowledge. They equated knowledge with virtue. So the kings must be philosophers, and only philosophers could be kings. Plato envisioned a state built on reason, justice, courage, and temperance. And these four also became his four cardinal virtues. John Stuart Mill also has extensively written on an ideal state, and he advocated a liberal form of governance. He propounded this liberal form of governance in his work on liberty. In his conception of an ideal state, individual liberty is balanced with social good. He emphasized that the state must protect people's basic liberties and ensure their welfare. Henry David Thoreau, he put forward the idea of minimalist governance. He believed that government is best, one that governs the least. This is true in case of Gandhiji's Ram Rajya as well. In the conception of Gandhiji's Ram Rajya, the government has to provide the basic necessities to the citizens, but there has to be simplicity in the governance administration, in the governance structure. And whenever that would be the case, the machinery of governance would be propelled by individuals' conscience. Henry David Thoreau also says that individual's conscience is the moral guide. You must also read about Leo Tolstoy's vision of the ideal state as he propounded it in The Kingdom of God is Within You. He renounced violence. He was a great influence on Mahatma Gandhi. He preached universal love, truth, brotherhood, selfless service to others. He believed that individuals can transform society through enlightenment and moral development. And society cannot be transformed through political means. We need ethical and spiritual uprising, not political uprising, not material progress. Aurobindo Ghosh, one of the modern Indian philosophers, he theorized the rule of the spirit. And the same message is given here as well. The inner moral and spiritual elements, they govern society, not the outer political machinery. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, he believed in the rule of spiritual truth. He envisioned a world of federations of free individuals in free societies guided by the spiritual truth of oneness and humanity. You must also read a little about spiritual democracy advocated by Dalai Lama. And the same message, compassion, ethics, conscience, they shape the society. There is no tyranny of majority. Well-being of all humans, including future generation, is the core aspect of spiritual democracy. It also says the same thing. The outer liberal values emerge from inner morality and wisdom in each individual. They all say the same thing in different forms, and the nitty gritty, the details of the theories might be different. But among all of them, we will take one philosopher from here who is one of the most important philosophers laying the foundation of Western philosophy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, you already must have guessed, is the brilliant student of Socrates, Plato. I would like to quickly introduce you to the concept of Plato's just society. In his philosophy, Plato gave a prominent place to the idea of justice. Plato realized that all theories propounded by earlier philosophers like Cephalus, they all contained one common element, and that one common element was that all of them treated justice as something external, something to be externally accomplished, something that can be imported, or maybe a form of convention. But Plato had a different prism to look through it. But Plato had a different lens to look at it, and he brought the concept of justice inside soul. He said that soul is the place of habitation of justice. According to Plato, justice is also internal to us because it resides in human soul. Justice, therefore, is not born of fear of the weak. It is not born to protect the weak, but it is the longing of human soul to do a duty according to its nature. So an unjust man brutalizes his soul. His soul is not in order, so he cannot be a happy man. And then Plato goes on to strike an analogy between human organism on one hand and social organism on the other. Human as an organism, according to Plato, contains three elements: reason, spirit, and appetite. An individual is just when each part of his or her soul performs its function according to internalizing. And according to Plato, human beings as an organism, they are just when all three components of the soul, they are in order, performing the function they are tasked with, not interfering into each other's. They're all aligned with each other, cohesively working. There is no internal disharmony. There is no violence of one over the other. So the soul lives with non-violence. And that's why the more just a soul is, the happier the individual's existence is. There are three parts, although I'll not touch upon the details of the philosophy of Plato. That's going to run into 2 to 3 hours. But I'll quickly touch upon the concept of Plato's just society. And for that, I must tell you that this reason, this section of the soul, the rational part, that is predominant in a just person's soul. That's the claim of Plato's theory, that reason must dominate over spirit and appetite. And reason encompasses motivation to seek what one believes to be good. And the reason must also include specific love for knowledge and learning. It is a dominant part because according to Plato, reason takes charge of emotions and appetites to determine an end in a decision-making process and make choices for just behavior. So all in all, what Plato is saying is that in a just person, reason and rationality predominates, and non-rational desires, including emotions, spirit, and appetites, they are kept under careful restraint. That's the job of the reason section of soul. And the spirited part of us, very distinct from reason, it causes us to seek some self-aggrandizing goals like honor, status, victory in war, maybe revenge against our enemies, all of that. And appetite or the desiring element comprise a range of motivations for the lower ends, like material wealth, sexual gratification, and other kind of pleasures and distractions. But Plato in his theory also suggests that some of the appetites are good. For example, desire for financial stability, they are good. And corresponding to these three elements in human nature, there are three classes in social organisms. Those three classes are philosopher, auxiliaries, and appetite. Philosopher class or the ruling class are the representatives of reason. Auxiliary class of warriors and defenders of the class is representative of spirit. So he's drawing the parallel between the three sections of soul and the three classes in society. Reason for philosopher, spirit. That's for the warrior class, auxiliaries. And the appetite instinct of the community consists of farmers, artisans, and lower rung of the ladder. The most crucial part of Plato's just society is weaving a web between human organism and social organism. Justice, therefore, for Plato is like a manuscript which exists in two copies. It exists in both individual and society, but it exists, of course, on a larger scale and is in more visible form in the society. But the crux of the matter is this: individually, justice is a human virtue that makes a man self consistent and good. And socially, justice is social consciousness that makes a society internally harmonious and good. That if you come to think of it, it's one and the same thing. These elements in society consist of people, and parallel to these elements, there are elements inside one's soul. Their harmonious existence and guidance to spirit and appetite by reason is how justice functions inside individual. And in the same way, the king has to be philosopher, he has to be knowledge seeker, he has to have propensity for learning, he must think and deliberate, he must have right consciousness, and that's how he would guide the auxiliaries and appetite. And that's how justice will come in the society, if there is justice in the soul. If there is justice in the soul, only when the right part of the soul will take up the right job in the society. So function specialization is an important implicit part of Plato's just society. But that kind of function specialization has not been propounded by Gandhiji, where everyone is equal. The discussion over here actually explains the idea of justice of Plato. And now if you have to think of the idea of just society, it's actually the extension of that. There has to be a philosopher king. Now you would understand and appreciate why he talked about a philosopher king. Because of his theory. Spirit and appetite has to be controlled by reason. And that cannot be done by anyone. An extension of that has to happen in society as well. So the people who are at the helm of affairs, they must be philosophers having knowledge to do the job that reason does inside the soul. Plato believed that the rulers of philosopher kings, they must be the wisest and most virtuous members of society. They should be chosen based on their intellect and moral qualities rather than their wealth or the status. And this philosopher king has to be the true philosopher. True philosopher is someone who is not only deemed essential for just society, but who embodies the conception of individual justice. So he has achieved the notion of justice inside the soul already. And because the whole theory has been constructed in that way, there has to be hierarchy and orders. The rulers will govern, the auxiliaries will protect the state, they have to obey the orders, and the appetites or the producers, they will work to sustain the community. This has a parallel with the Jajmani system of ancient India, where the community was divided into 4 classes, and those 4 classes took a new form later into the caste system. The idea was pretty much the same. It was the functional specialization, not based on birth. Jajmani system was not based on birth. Later it was started to be based on birth. But just like Plato says that the philosopher king must be chosen based on intellect and moral qualities rather than wealth or status. The same was true for Jajmani system as well. Plato emphasized that the rulers, the guardians, they have no private advantage or privilege. They honestly rule for the benefit of the whole society. This is same as the principle of trusteeship of Gandhiji. The wealthy and the powerful would act as trustees. The ruler must have no private advantage or privilege. They must honestly rule for the benefit of the whole society. That's the concept of trusteeship. Plato also forbade the rulers or the auxiliaries from having any private property. They have to live commonly with basic necessities provided by the state. Common good have to have the utmost importance. It must be the end of the ruler. That's how prosperity will come about as per the concept of Ram Rajya. That's how economic inequality of Ram Rajya will come about. And I have told you before, every philosopher will focus on education because every philosopher wants moral values and consciousness to be developed within individuals. During the course of our discussion, we already have drawn parallel between Gandhiji's Ram Rajya concept and Plato's just society concept. Now, formally and altogether, we are going to do it again. I have told you in the beginning that any theory that discusses the social order has to begin with justice. It has to be the first social value. Gandhiji emphasized on Satya, truth. He said that every individual must find out the true nature of the situation and then act accordingly. And then he laid out principles of non-violence, dharma, to act according to Satya, to act according to truth. That is the notion as to how justice will come about according to Gandhiji, Satya and Dharma. But according to Plato's just society, it is the knowledge that's the basis of everything. Knowledge brings virtues. Virtues are important for reasoning. Reason is the most important part of the soul. And one who can reason, they are the philosophers. And philosophers must only become kings. So knowledge of the good is what brings about justice. Plato explicitly talked about justice within the individuals, and he was the first philosopher in the Western philosophy to bring about this concept. There has to be harmony between individuals' internal self and external existence. There has to be justice in the soul for justice to be exhibited in the society. So within the individual, justice is an order of the parts of the soul. Now, this kind of explicit relation between internal justice and external justice is not there in Gandhiji's Ram Rajya. But he does talk about, but he, like every other philosopher, will talk about internal self. We have seen earlier that Gandhiji has focused on spiritual self-sufficiency. Now, he did not expand much on it, but he did talk about spiritual self-sufficiency and the moral values. Spiritual self-sufficiency with values is required to address injustices in society. So both the philosophers, again, we see, have talked about justice within the individual. In Gandhiji's Ram Rajya, I've told you, the term Ram refers to Lord Rama and it embodies a just ruler or the philosopher king. Plato lays great emphasis on role of philosopher king, who possesses wisdom and virtue and accordingly he runs the society. But as you understand, since the inspiration of Ram Rajya concept of Gandhiji was from Ramayana, so he will not go about explaining the role of philosopher king because that is Lord himself. But so in Gandhiji's concept of Ram Rajya, much emphasis is not there on the role of the ruler. But anyways, we understand that there has to be minimalist governance in the concept of Ram Rajya. And people must take for themselves the major decisions. Government must only ensure that basic needs of people are fulfilled. The concept of trusteeship is explicit in Gandhian concept of Ram Rajya. Leaders must act as trustees of citizens. Power is not concentrated, but it is decentralized. And the similar concept is also there in Plato's just society. Plato has said that the philosopher king rules for the benefit of all, and there is no private advantage or privilege. So that is trusteeship basically. Gandhiji has laid great emphasis on non-violence, not just externally, but also within. Plato also has talked about harmonious and cohesive working of different parts of the soul. But non-violence as an important concept does not appear in Plato's just society concept. Plato's just society actually gives role to the auxiliaries, the warrior class, to protect the state against enemies, fight the enemies, even kill the enemies. Plato in his just society gives elaborate role of the king, the auxiliaries, and the appetite class, the producer class. So the administrative machinery of Plato is elaborate one. But there is concept of simplicity in governance in Gandhian Ram Rajya. In Gandhian concept of Ram Rajya, all sections can participate in governance. There is absolute equality, there is rights to minority, everything is taken care of. But as you understand, fundamentally, Plato disallowed certain people to become a ruler. Only philosophers can become rulers. So there is no equal participation in governance. Plato actually abhorred this concept. He said democracy is the second worst form of governance, second only to tyranny. And a lot of it has to do with the prevailing scenario of Athens back then, during the time of Plato. And the last straw that broke the camel's back was the execution of Socrates. That made him question the wisdom of the rulers. Both the philosophers focuses on education, and there has to be common good education also in the conception of Plato's just society. Although different people are going to take different roles, but they share a common interest in justice and welfare. Both the philosopher focuses on common good. There shouldn't be any private ownership in Plato's concept of just society, and the rich and the powerful must willingly give up their wealth in Gandhian concept of Ram Rajya, which has the underlying current of non-violence. So the state shouldn't strip them of their properties and wealth. They must willingly give it out. There are social classes in Plato's concept of just society. Rulers will rule, the spirited auxiliaries, they will protect the state, and the appetite producers will provide with goods and services to all citizens. So there is a concept of social class, but all of them have common interest in justice and welfare of the whole. But the social class had no relevance in Gandhian Ram Rajya. Everyone is equal and there's a concept of universal brotherhood. Gandhiji paid exceptional focus on women's equality. He said to call the woman the weaker sex is libel, something you say to destroy the reputation of someone and is punishable. To call woman the weaker sex is a libel. It is man's injustice to woman. If by strength is meant moral power, then woman is immeasurably man's superior. Although there is a concept of equality in Plato's theory as well, he said that women can also become philosopher king if they had the necessary qualities and virtues. But so much of his stress is not necessarily given. Plato did not prioritize women's equality in the manner and the way that Gandhiji did. But the heart and soul of both the philosophy is communal living. Communal living meaning living in the community setup. That is the end of both the philosophy. We must live harmoniously and with prosperity, with equality and justice in one common society. Although this is the articulation of Plato, but the undercurrent of both the philosophy is the same, that we must endeavor to live in a just society, which is that of a healthy organism where all the parts function for the benefit of the whole and whole benefits the part. That's how the cells in the organism lives. They all function to benefit the whole and the whole benefits the parts. There is an editorial article on open justice. Recently, Supreme Court has directed the central government to restore the broadcasting license of Media One, a Malayalam channel. As this article highlights that this step of the Supreme Court strikes a blow for media freedom and fair procedure. This judgment not only protects the media freedom, but it also lay importance to fair procedure. The thing is that the bench hearing the case, being headed by Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chanchud, denied to accept the reason by the ministry in a sealed cover. Some intelligence input that the ministry was pleading to be seen by the court in a sealed cover, that request was denied, on the ground that this is violation of the principle of natural justice and open justice. So here we shall have a short discussion on the concept of open justice. Open justice is the principle that legal proceedings should be open and transparent to the public. It is a fundamental principle of the legal system in many countries, including India, and is considered to be essential for other legal principles like natural justice, rule of law, to which we shall come in a while. Let's see some of the characteristics of open justice. First of all, in open justice, the information is accessible to people. Public can access court proceedings. Open justice requires that the court proceedings are open to public, unless, of course, there are compelling reasons to restrict the access. Anyone can attend the court proceeding and access court documents. Of course, there would be restrictions such as protection of privacy, which is another fundamental right of citizens, especially of vulnerable witness. Open justice also requires that court proceedings are conducted in a transparent manner. And under transparency, it is also crucial that the reasons for the court decisions, they are to be explained to the parties involved and public in general. So written judgment, it is a part of the system of open justice. And those judgments are also made a matter of public record. Previously, we have discussed many a times that transparency enables accountability. And because of transparency, open justice promotes accountability by allowing the public to see how decisions are made and how justice is administered. This is crucial to maintain public confidence in the legal system. it is also a kind of internal check in the judiciary that judges and also other decision makers in the administrative side, they are held accountable for their actions. Open justice promotes the principle of fairness, which is the foundation of rule of law. It does so by ensuring that all parties to the legal proceedings have equal opportunity to present their case. And because things are done openly, the decision making process have to be conducted in an impartial manner. So making things open, transparent, accessible can ensure fairness. Open courts allow the public and the media to attend and report on hearing. It encourages public participation, and this fosters public engagement and debates around the legal issues. All these strengthens our democracy. Openness allows the people to see justice being done. This engagement, this scrutiny, this builds confidence in the system and exposes any improper influences or abuse of the process if at all was involved. If at all. The detailed written judgment by the judges, they educate people about the law, the legal system, legal jurisprudence, legal principles. These creates awareness and understanding and also appreciation of the system. With the closer eye of public and media, it's difficult to have arbitrariness in the rulings. The courts have to reason and account for their decisions under open justice. Although open justice is a fundamental principle of the legal system, there have to be some exceptions. Matters relating to national security may require closed proceedings to prevent sensitive information becoming public, and the privacy and the security of witnesses that also sometimes warrant closed hearing or anonymization, especially in sexual assault or family law cases. There may also be risk of disruption or violence in some controversial cases. Confidential commercial information in dispute, they must also remain private. So some commercial cases may be heard in closed chambers. And the principle of open justice, it's closely related to many other judicial principles like natural justice, rule of law, judicial accountability, separation of power, and the general functioning of a robust democracy. Rule of law refers to law being applied equally to all. And the law should govern people equally without discrimination. Open justice helps uphold the rule of law by exposing impartiality of the courts, if at all, and making the trial and the reasoning process fair, transparent, and available to public scrutiny. Without openness, the rule of law could be compromised behind closed doors. Open justice also allows the procedures of natural justice to be fulfilled. The concept of fair hearing, it is one of the principles of natural justice. Audi alterum partem, I don't know how to pronounce, but it means fair hearing. And the second most important principle of natural justice is impartiality. These principles require that all parties get opportunity. Opportunity to present their case, all evidence should be considered, and decisions be made without bias. Public access to trials and reasoning demonstrates natural justice is served. Closed hearing could raise doubts. Openness also makes judges and the judiciary accountable to the citizens and the law. Their actions and decisions can be evaluated by public and other branches of government. You know that transparency is essential for true accountability, and public trust depends on the level of accountability. Separation of powers between judiciary, executive, and legislature requires that no one branch becomes too powerful. The transparency brought by open justice ensures that the judiciary's power remains in check and balanced. Closed or secret courts, they concentrate power in the judiciary without oversight. Openness maintains institutional integrity. The judicial decision has to be rational and impartial. And you know, democracy requires informed and engaged public. Open justice supports this by educating citizens about laws and the legal process. It also allows for debate around the legal issues and the court cases. When people understand and can discuss the system, it strengthens the democratic participation. Closed courts would hamper people's ability to meaningfully participate in the process, get engaged, learn, and participate to improve it further. So the principle of open justice has a symbiotic relationship with concepts like rule of law, natural justice, judicial accountability, separation of power, and democracy. It ensures integrity, fairness, and public trust in the legal system, which upholds these other principles. Supreme Court of India has made various judgments that uphold and promote the principle of open justice. Although there have been some judgments before 1975 as well, but this particular judgment, the state of Uttar Pradesh versus Raj Narayan, this case is a landmark for open justice in India. In this case, the court said that the provisions of the constitution ensure a public hearing and open trial. The court proceedings cannot be held in secret, and public have the right to know what transpires in courts. Open justice is integral to the judiciary. This was the stand taken in the state of Uttar Pradesh versus Raj Narayan case in 1975, and hence this case opened the door to open justice. In 1988, in the Keher Singh case, the court ruled that the public trial aims to ensure fairness and impartiality. Denial of public access undermines the very basis of a fair trial. As open justice is a pivotal feature of the judiciary, any restriction must be exercised with caution, and restrictions must be made only for extremely compelling reasons. In 2011, in Swami Chinmayanand versus State of Uttar Pradesh case, Supreme Court stated that public confidence in judiciary cannot be permitted to be eroded by taking the judicial decisions in closed chambers or confidentiality, reiterating the principle of open justice in the Indian judicial system. In 2012, in Sahara India Real Estate Corporation versus SEBI case, Supreme Court held that public has a right to know about the proceedings of regulatory bodies such as SEBI as well, and that the principle of open justice must be applied to such regulatory bodies as well. In Subramanian Swamy versus the Union of India case of 2016, Supreme Court held that the public has a right to know about the progress of investigations and trials. The bar for withholding information must be very high, as being said in the previous cases. Only minimum restrictions in certain cases must be imposed. The presumption must always be in the favor of openness. In 2018, Supreme Court gave three very important judgments with regard to open justice. In the case of Swapnil Tripathi versus Supreme Court of India, the petitioners requested the Supreme Court to start live streaming, live telecast of the proceedings in the matters of constitutional importance. They argued that this would enhance the rule of law by increasing accessibility and accountability and foster greater confidence in judiciary. Supreme Court agreed and ruled in the favor of live streaming of cases. Supreme Court said a remarkable thing in this case. It said that the administration of justice is a public act of the state. So it must happen publicly, openly, transparently, with information accessibility. Supreme Court recognized the rights of citizens to witness court proceedings as part of their right to freedom of speech and expression. In the same year, in Ankur Sidhu versus Union of India case, Supreme Court ruled in favor of sharing copies of the administrative side files, registers, confidential reports, and resolutions of the Supreme Court Collegium. The court emphasized that open justice is one of the cardinal principles of justice dispensation system. It requires that public must be allowed to access to scrutinize the manner and the way in which justice is being dispensed. And then in Common Cause versus Union of India case of 2018, Supreme Court directed allowing audio and video recording of constitutional benches and making them available online. Supreme Court latter also agreed to come under RTI. That's how the journey of open justice has been through the judgments of Supreme Court of India. You will find this article in today's newspaper, Full Circle for Odisha IAS Officer, from abduction to review of transformation. IAS Officer R. Vinil Krishna, he is the Special Secretary to Odisha's Chief Minister, Mr. Naveen Patnaik. 12 years back, he was abducted in 2011. He was unharmed during the abduction, perhaps because of the social capital among people. And after 12 years, when he revisited the place for the review of transformation, he was asked if he was scared. We will cover this topic again from the perspective of GS Paper 4. IAS Officer R. Vinil Krishna clearly has shown the spirit of public service. He has shown the higher values of civil services of courage, dedication. He also has shown empathy towards the people. The abduction was made possible because of the local support that the Maoist cadre enjoyed. But even after that, the developmental work taken by IAS Vinil Krishna was not stopped, rather accelerated. In this context, we shall quickly go through the civil service values, which is one of the important area from question do appear every year. In 2021, UPSC asked identify 5 ethical traits on which one can plot the performance of civil servants. Another question of the same year, identify 10 essential values that are needed to be an effective public servant. They also asked question on impartiality, non-partisanship. They have asked question on many values in the past like integrity. They have asked questions on perseverance. Civil service values is also mentioned in the syllabus as a topic. One of the fundamental public service value or the civil service value is integrity. Integrity is moral intactness. Integrity is the best defense against erosion of morality, is the best defense against corruption. You can go through these pointers to enrich the content on integrity, but we do not have so much of time to discuss everything. Dedication also has been mentioned in your syllabus. Dedication is commitment with passion. So there is an element of emotion involved in dedication. So it is higher than commitment. Dedication is an important civil service values, especially in developing country, because civil servants have to work on various fronts. There are challenges of development. Conditions could be hostile both within the institution of civil service and externally, maybe because of extremism, maybe because of Naxalism. And the scope of corruption, both external temptation and internal hedonism is also there. The fruits of developmental process does not come very easy. It takes time. So perseverance and dedication becomes very important, especially in the context of developing nations. Objectivity, another very important civil service values. Objectivity means the ability to judge fairly, without bias, without any external influence, to see things as it is, based your judgment on facts. Objectivity is important because objectivity gives a sense of equal treatment by the administration to all. And that gives legitimacy to bureaucracy. That is why people would listen to government and administration, because there's a sense of impartiality among the personals. And when it is seen that you are being impartial, non-partisan, then your existence is legitimized. It also increases the trust and social capital among people. And once you have social capital, you have cooperation. It helps in building consensus. Objectivity can also become a tool for resolving ethical dilemmas. In your syllabus, you also have empathy and compassion mentioned as a civil service value. Sympathy is understanding of others' pain. Empathy is feeling others' pain. And compassion is taking action out of that empathy. Compassion is empathy in action. Empathy and compassion is the way to modernize bureaucracy. It's one of the most powerful ways to uplift the bureaucracy above the colonial mindset. It is important for dedication as well. It's important for tolerance as well. It's important for accelerated and inclusive growth. The relevant example for empathy you can pick up from the slide. If you are asked to teach one value to humanity, which value will that be? That could either be empathy, but in my opinion, it should be tolerance. Tolerance is the capacity to recognize and respect beliefs and practices of others with which you do not agree. But in the notion of Swami Vivekananda, we must not only tolerate others, but positively embrace them. Swami Vivekananda has taught us to go one step ahead, not just recognizing and respecting, but according to the view of Swami Vivekananda, we must also positively embrace others with whom we do not agree. Tolerance is extremely important. Without tolerance, you cannot be objective. Inherently, you'll have bias if you do not have tolerance for all point of view. You cannot be impartial, you cannot be non-partisan. So nothing will work out then. Your decision cannot be fair, your constitutional obligations will never be fulfilled. And all the achievements that we have seen that can come about through impartiality, objectivity, non-partisanship will not be achieved if you do not have tolerance. You will find the element of tolerance in all the major philosophies that you will study. Today we have seen Gandhiji's Ram Rajya, which most prominently has non-violence as its characteristics. You cannot have it without tolerance. Plato has taught the value of temperance. Aristotle has talked about golden mean. There's a very famous quotation of Voltaire, I disagree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Impartiality is judgment solely on merit. It's mostly directed towards individuals. And non-partisanship, being associated or taking judgment bereft of bias. It's directed towards a group, political group or social group. Without impartiality and non-partisanship, there cannot be legitimacy of bureaucracy. There will be no credibility, there will be no trust, there will be no social capital, there will be no cooperation, and administration will become extremely difficult. UPSC has focused on this theme that beside domain knowledge, civil servants must be innovative. And you have to gather example for all these values. For instance, Harjinder Singh Kukreja, he built Chocolate Ganesha. Chocolate Ganesha idol was to be immersed in milk, and the chocolate milk was to be distributed to children. This take care of many things. The religious sentiment of people. It take care of environmental ethics. It take care of social ethics, empathy, compassion towards weak and vulnerable section, hungry children. So resolving ethical dilemma through innovation and keeping up the efficiency of the system, that is one of the expected role of civil servants. Civil servants are expected to bring about citizen-centric administration. For instance, Saurav Kumar, the DM of Dantewada, he started Lunch with Collector program to interact with tribal students during lunch, to break the psychological barrier between the administrator and citizens. You must have famously heard about Prashant Nair. He is famously called as Collector Bro. Bro is an informal term. You use it for someone very close to you. Collector Bro makes the collector, the IAS officer, a very familiar figure. It sheds the psychological barrier between citizens and the DM. It makes him more accessible to people. Similarly, there are many other examples which you can collect from here. Civil servants also have to be very persuasive. Persuasion brings changes in their attitude without coercion. So it keeps the dignity of citizens intact. That's why it is important. I'll give you a stellar example in this. Divya Devarajan. She learned the language Gondi within 3 months of her posting to Adilabad. When she was posted to Adilabad, there was a tribal unrest. And as before, she could have used force. But rather, she learned the language. And once the tribal community realized that she could speak their language, they poured their hearts out. There was an emotional connect with Divya Devarajan. They would come in the meetings when invited by her. She would listen to the problems, and they would understand the point of view of administration, and a dialogue can begin. She started appointing a representative of the tribal community in local hospitals who could translate their language and help to establish communication between the tribal people and the local administration. That's how the tribal unrest was dealt with. This is persuasion. And the value that we started discussing is courage. It takes courage to go back to the same place where you were abducted. But courage is considered to be the value on which other values are hinged. You will not speak up. You won't have integrity. You cannot bring about justice. You cannot be impartial. You cannot be non-partisan. This was just a very short introduction. Maybe sometime later in the DNS, we shall take up in detail the expected role of civil servants and with furthermore examples, the civil service values. But so much for today. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Take care.